Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We have a lot to get through today, including a very good hold for Superman in its second weekend, kind of the second major obstacle that movie had to clear, as well as everything else going on at the box office right now. So let's jump right into it, and we will start with the number one movie for a second consecutive week. It was Superman, which brought in $58.4 million, a 53.2% drop from its debut a week ago. Its domestic total is now at $236.2 million. If you'll remember on last week's show, I said that I thought the movie did what it needed to do in week number one, which is to have a good debut. But the thing that has hurt DC movies in the past, especially in the DCEU era, was the second week drop-off. And Superman did not repeat history. We're going to break down all of the numbers on that in just a couple minutes. In second place, also holding pretty well, especially against stiff competition from Superman, was Jurassic World Rebirth, which dropped 41.2% and brought in another $23.7 million. It's now at $276 million domestically. Less impressive was the debut of I Know What You Did Last Summer, the 2025 version, which debuted at $12.7 million. Also unimpressive, Smurfs debuting in fourth place with just over $11 million. However, going back to impressive, we have F1 the movie, which in its fourth week dropped 24.4% and brought in another $9.8 million. Its domestic total is now at over $150 million. In sixth place was How to Train Your Dragon. In its sixth week of release, it dropped 31.7% and brought in another $5.4 million. Debuting in seventh place was the latest film from Ari Aster, Eddington, with a $4.2 million debut. That is not impressive, particularly given the fact that this was not a big budget film, but definitely a healthily budgeted film, between $35 to $50 million, depending on which source you're listening to. And a $4.2 million debut isn't great from that end. Of course, A24 is not necessarily all about the money. They also like to give resources to filmmakers to make movies that are daring and divisive in many cases, and that's certainly what Eddington was. But still, it did not seem like a lot of moviegoers were ready to go back to the 2020 era right in the middle of COVID, and Eddington winds up in seventh place. Leo, in its fifth week of release, dropped 47.2% and brought in another $2 million, but it is still stuck at $69 million domestically. Lilo and Stitch spends a ninth week in the top 10. It brought in another $1.5 million, and rounding out the top 10 is 28 Years Later, which spends its fifth week with a $1.3 million total and a $68.7 million domestic total overall. Dropping out of the top 10 this past weekend, we had three movies. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is out after 8 weeks, Materialist is out after 5 weeks, and Megan 2.0 ends 3 disappointing weeks in the top 10. And when we look at the longest run in the top 10 for movies released this year, Lilo and Stitch is now tied with Sinners at 9 weeks for the longest run so far. A Minecraft movie, Dog Man, Captain America: Brave New World, and Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning are all tied basically for second place with 8 weeks in the top 10. And if Lilo and Stitch can stick around for one more week, it will have the record outright for 2025. These are the movies that lost the most theaters this past weekend. 28 Years Later lost 989 theaters. It's still in just over 1,200. Megan 2.0 lost 946 theaters, over half of its remaining total. It's now out of wide release in 712 theaters. Lilo and Stitch lost a pretty big batch of theaters, 750 of them. It's now in 1,325. Elio lost 695 theaters. It's in just over 2,000. I expect a bigger number next week as theaters make room for the Fantastic Four: First Steps. And Jurassic World Rebirth lost its first big batch of theaters. It lost 470 of them, but it's still in 3,854. This chart is what I like to call our road to recovery. The red line is the weekend average for 2021 to 2024. The blue line is the average for 2015 to 2019. And the dotted black line is every weekend so far this year. And as expected, or at least as I expected, we dipped back below the average both pre and post pandemic. But we should see that shoot back up again next weekend with the release of Fantastic Four. And if the August movies that are coming out, Naked Gun and Bad Guys 2, and the other ones that have already come out, if they can play through August as well, then we could perhaps see a bit of a run where we are above average, at the very least for what we have been doing. But you never know. The August box office can get a little weird from time to time. So let's talk about Superman and how well it held in its second weekend. These are the weekend 2 drop-offs for DC films since 2005, which is when Batman Begins kind of kicked off the modern era. And these are just for what I call the Justice League films, basically heroes that are part of the Justice League or Justice League adjacent. And you can see that with its 53.2% drop-off, Superman is in the upper half of this list. As a matter of fact, when you look at this list, Superman, The Dark Knight, The Batman, and Wonder Woman are the only movies that qualify for the list that opened over $100 million and avoided a weekend 2 drop of 60% or more. And when you're looking at good company to be in, those are the movies that you want to be in when it comes to DC. Now, the movies that are in black are movies that were part of the DCEU, which has now ended. And you can really see what I was talking about earlier as far as big weekend 2 drop-offs for movies in that universe. It's part of what hastened its demise because we see movies like The Flash, The Suicide Squad, Batman v Superman, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, Man of Steel, Wonder Woman 1984, which was, to be fair, a movie that came out simultaneously on streaming, same as The Suicide Squad. But then the original Suicide Squad back in 2016 also had a steep weekend 2 drop-off. Aquaman and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom actually had the best weekend 2 holds of this current crop of DC films, but you have to remember that those movies also had that weird Christmas quirk where they came out just like right before the Christmas holiday and then had really good second weekends because everybody was going out to see movies after Christmas. So really on a one-to-one basis, if you're talking about a drop-off for Superman, it's comparable to The Dark Knight. It's comparable to the first Shazam movie, which of course opened much lower than Superman did. And this is great news for Superman. On last week's show, I said it's not just about the opening weekend, it's about everything else that happens. And if you're going to break down Superman's box office run into little mini missions that it has to achieve, it accomplished mission number 1, which was to open well. It has now accomplished mission number 2, which is to hold well in its second weekend. And now mission 3 really is sustaining this across the rest of its theatrical run. Of course, it has steep competition this upcoming weekend with the Fantastic Four, but there is room in the marketplace for more than one movie. And if Fantastic Four can thrive and Superman can also continue to do well, then we can see Marvel and DC both succeeding simultaneously at the summer box office. And the importance of legs on a movie and the importance of holding strong in weekend number 2, I think is really well shown by this graph. This is the box office performance day by day of Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Superman. Man of Steel is in blue, Batman v Superman is in black, and Superman is in red. And you can see, first of all, when you look at Superman versus Man of Steel, through the first few days, they were very close to each other. But you can see in days 8, 9, and 10 that Superman really begins to diverge, take flight, if you will, and pull ahead of where Man of Steel is. And not only that, it also really starts to cut into the lead that Batman v Superman has. This is going to be a very interesting one to watch over the next couple of weeks because I talk about box office legs on this show all the time and how it's not just the opening weekend, but this could be one of the best examples that we've seen in a very long time about how it's not just about the first 3 days or 4 days or even the first week. It's about word of mouth. It's about what people are saying about the movie. It's about repeat viewings. And that's what we're seeing with Superman right now. Looking at the franchise tracker for the Superman films by domestic gross, this year's Superman is already number 3 all time at $236.2 million, behind only Man of Steel and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. It has passed the domestic gross of Superman Returns, as well as the 4 Christopher Reeve films. When you adjust for inflation, though, 2025 Superman is a bit lower on the list. It is at number 6. It's now ahead of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, which is a basement dweller in every meaning of the word, as well as Superman 3. And it's got some work to do to catch up to Superman Returns, but it seems to be on that track. The question after that will be, can it get up to Superman 2 territory? Can it approach the inflation-adjusted gross of Man of Steel at $417.3 million? But I think it also just puts into perspective how successful 1978's Superman was, because it's number 1 easily by over $200 million with an adjusted gross of $661.7 million. And next week, by the time we do the show, this year's Superman will also be one of the 10 highest grossing DC films at the domestic box office. Believe it or not, it's going to displace 1989's Batman, which was so successful that it is to this day one of the highest grossing DC films, unadjusted for inflation. That run is going to end next week. But you know what I like to do? I like to adjust for inflation. So if you look at the list as it is, The Dark Knight's number one, followed by The Dark Knight Rises, Wonder Woman, The Batman, Joker, Aquaman, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, Man of Steel, and Batman 89. Adjusted for inflation, The Dark Knight is still the highest grossing DC film of all time at $820.6 million. But Superman the movie is right behind at $661.7 million, all the way from 1978. And 1989's Batman is right behind Superman the movie at $651.1 million. The Dark Knight Rises is just behind Batman 89. And then we have a gulf of a little over $100 million. Wonder Woman is in fifth place at $534.6 million adjusted for inflation, followed by Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, Aquaman, Joker, and Man of Steel. If Superman 2025 can get up to $420 million, it would have to have a lot of staying power. Then it will also become one of the highest grossing DC films of all time, adjusted for inflation as well as unadjusted for inflation. Let's take a look at some of the other movies that were in the top 10 this weekend. First of all, we will tackle the I Know What You Did Last Summer franchise. And this year's iteration is not having some of the comeback success that we're seeing with Superman. As you can see, we've had 3 theatrical films so far. The highest opener of those 3 is still the sequel to the 1997 original, which is called I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. That opened to $16.5 million back in 1998. Then we have 1997's original film in second place at $15.8 million. And this year's I Know What You Did Last Summer opened about $3 million behind the original if you don't even adjust for inflation. When you do adjust for inflation, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer opened to $37.5 million. The original film opened to $36.6 million. And the new version comes in about $24 million behind the original, adjusted for inflation. So really just a drop off. Nobody was that interested in seeing a new I Know What You Did Last Summer movie, or if they were, they certainly didn't care that much about this revival of the franchise. Speaking of diminishing returns, let's look at the Smurfs franchise. This latest Smurfs film is also a basement dweller in the franchise. Even if you don't account for inflation, it's at number 4 at just over $11 million. The first Smurfs film in 2011 had a pretty good opening, $35.6 million. It was a hit worldwide. That's why they kept making more. But then we had a pretty steep drop-off with the Smurfs 2, about half of what the first Smurfs movie did. A drop-off from that with Smurfs The Lost Village. The first 3 Smurfs movies were Sony releases. Paramount decided to dig up the franchise and make a new movie this year, but it has not recaptured any of the, if you even want to call it magic, of the first 3 Smurfs movies. And really, I mean, in 2025, to make a Smurfs movie, I mean, that cartoon was barely relevant to me when I was a child, and that was a very, very long time ago. Paramount seems to be very concerned with cost cutting recently. I don't know if putting $60 million or so into a new Smurfs film was the best decision. I think they were hoping that maybe worldwide will bail them out. We'll see what it's like. It didn't have a particularly impressive international opening weekend. But Paramount not having even a fraction of the success with the franchise that Sony did. When you adjust those openings for inflation, the original Smurfs, believe it or not, opened to $52.6 million back in 2011. The Smurfs 2 opened to $25.1 million. Smurfs The Lost Village opened to $17.1. And then we have this year's Smurfs at $11 million. This movie is in theaters, and still just about the only thing that I can tell you is that Rihanna is apparently indeed Smurfette. A quick note on How to Train Your Dragon. This year's version has now surpassed How to Train Your Dragon 2 on the inflation-adjusted list for the franchise. So it's now the second highest grossing film in the How to Train Your Dragon franchise, behind only the original movie, which made $325 million adjusted for inflation. So How to Train Your Dragon is not going to get that high, but it is still past the other 2 sequels, and I think that DreamWorks is probably pretty happy about that. I mentioned Eddington's opening earlier. When you look at Ari Aster, his highest opening film is still his first movie, Hereditary, which opened to $13.5 million. It had a big mainstream marketing push, a terrible cinema score, but it got people in the theaters on that opening weekend. Midsommar only opened to $6.5 million. Then we have Eddington in third at $4.2 million. Beau is Afraid is in last place at $2.6 million, though it should be noted that it did have a weekend in limited release before it opened in wide release. So had it opened wide all at once, that gross likely would have been a bit higher. I don't know if it would have been above Eddington, but it would have been higher. Let's turn now from the domestic box office to the international box office and see what people were seeing around the world. The number one movie for a second weekend, as it was domestically, is Superman, which made $45.2 million. I talked last week about the fact that it didn't open particularly impressively internationally. Well, the good news is it at least held well. 52.2% drop off from the previous weekend. It seems like perhaps word of mouth is also working in many countries. I got a lot of feedback saying that because of the heat wave, that maybe some people didn't go see it on opening weekend. But it is not a tale of two markets like we saw last week. It actually was a pretty similar performance. Jurassic World Rebirth also holding well internationally. It dropped 40.8% and brought in another $40.2 million in all markets outside the US and Canada. Demon Slayer Infinity Castle. I've never been more jealous of people who live in Japan or can go see movies in Japan, because this is one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and it opened in the Japanese market to $36.5 million. It was actually an all-time record opening weekend at the Japanese box office in local currency, and this movie looks to be absolutely dominant in Japan for the foreseeable future. And then as it rolls out around the world, there's a lot of interest in the movie here. We'll see if it gets an opening in China. Anime has been a big draw in China, although some of the themes of Demon Slayer don't necessarily jibe with what Chinese censors often approve for release in the country. So we'll see what happens with that. But this is a prelude to what I think is going to be an impressive worldwide gross and a debut here in the United States later this year. F1 the movie also holding well internationally as well as domestically. It dropped 23.4%, but brought in another $29.5 million, and Smurfs debuted to $22.6 million from international markets. When you take those international numbers and you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get our top 5 films at the worldwide box office, and it's the same 5 movies, just in a slightly different order. Superman is at number 1. It brings in another $102.4 million worldwide in weekend number 2. It's now at over $400 million at the global box office. Jurassic World Rebirth brings in another 63.9%. It's now at almost $650 million globally. F1 the movie brings in another $39.1 million. It's at $463 million global. Demon Slayer Infinity Castle is in 4th in the worldwide box office at $36.5 million. And Smurfs comes in 5th place with $33.6 million, with a few million from earlier screenings in the week thrown into that $36 million worldwide total. This is the franchise tracker for Superman. When you look at it by worldwide gross, $409.3 million. It's behind Man of Steel, which made $670.1 million, and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice at $874.3 million. So it's now ahead of the 4 Christopher Reeve films globally, as well as Brandon Routh's one chance to play Superman in Superman Returns. Jurassic World Rebirth is also rising up these charts. It is now the 5th highest grossing Jurassic film worldwide, although I think that's where it's going to stay. It is holding well, but I don't see another $350 million in its future. So I think it is going to be the lowest grossing film in the Jurassic World part of the franchise, although it has outgrossed The Lost World Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park 3. Even though I don't see $1 billion in its future, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Universal was able to keep the budget in check, so I think this is still going to be a moneymaker for Universal. The only thing that I think I might take some trepidation or some caution about is the fact that it has been a decreasing amount of return for these films, from Jurassic World to Fallen Kingdom to Dominion, now to Rebirth. So if they want to keep making Jurassic films, they have to make sure that they are budgeting them responsibly, because both the domestic and the global market are saying, yeah, you know what, we'll still go see dinosaur movies, just not as many of us as have seen them in the past. And with Superman holding well in weekend number 2, it's a perfect chance to bring up my member poll question from last week. I asked members here on the channel about their thoughts after seeing Superman. The question was, did Superman make you more excited or less excited about the DCU's future? So basically starting from Superman and going forward. And if James Gunn and people at Warner Brothers were to see the results of this poll, I think they'd be happy. 60% of respondents said that Superman made them more excited about the DCU's future. Only 9% said that the movie made them less excited, and 31% said that it did not have any effect on their excitement. So, post-movie, if you're looking at fan response, to have 91% basically say that the movie didn't do any damage to their excitement, and a clear majority saying it made them more excited, that is what you're looking for. But we are now moving from Superman to the next big release from Marvel. The Fantastic Four First Steps hits theaters this upcoming weekend, and I wanted to take the temperature of the members here on the channel to see just how successful you all think that the movie is going to be. So my member poll question this week is, how big do you think the Fantastic Four First Steps will open domestically? There's 4 options here. Less than $100 million, which would be substantially below basically every tracking and estimate for what the movie is going to do. $100 to $125 million. There are many estimates and trackers that have the movie here. $125 to $150 million. Some people are saying that it could open in this range. And then finally, we have the $150 million plus range. That would be a substantial overperformance from what trackers are seeing. But as I often say, you can't track enthusiasm. So which of these 4 brackets do you think the Fantastic Four First Steps will fall in? If you are a member here on the channel, you can vote in that poll right now. And if you're not a member, you can check the description below for a link to join, or depending on how you're watching the video, there might just be a button for you to click. Channel members get to vote every single week on the poll here on Charts with Dan. You also get early access to a lot of my videos like this one, as well as custom badges and emoji to use down in the chat. So I would love to have you come and join and hear your voice right here every single week. Fantastic Four is also the subject of this week's Charts with Dan trivia question. I had to dig a little deep, but I think this is a very interesting bit of trivia. 2005's Fantastic Four opened at number 1 ahead of the second weekend of a movie starring an A-list actor. 2015's ill-fated Fantastic Four opened at number 2 behind the second weekend of a movie starring the same actor. Who was that actor? So which actor was the star of the movie that 2005's Fantastic Four opened ahead of, and the movie that 2015's Fantastic Four opened behind? I'll give you another second to think, and this is an actor who is also relevant this summer. It was Tom Cruise. 2005's Fantastic Four opened ahead of weekend number 2 for War of the Worlds. 2015's Fantastic Four opened behind weekend number 2 of Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. There will not be a repeat of that feat this year unless Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning really gets a boost at the box office. But this is one of those things that I just enjoy looking up when I'm doing these trivia questions. There's just these weird arcane bits of coincidence that you often see at the box office. Let's go now into what I call some of our specialty charts, and we will start with the per theater averages for this past weekend. Superman spends a second weekend at number 1, bringing in an average of $13,673 per theater in almost 4,300 theaters. Then we have Cloud, which is the latest film from Kiyoshi Kurosawa. That film brought in $11,844 per theater in just 2 theaters. Then we have Hung Up on a Dream, the Zombies documentary, which brought in a little over $8,800 in 2 theaters. That is, of course, about the smash sensation British band from the 1960s. Jurassic World Rebirth comes in 4th place, bringing in $6,150 per theater in each of its over 3,800 theaters. And then we have Apocalypse Now. We've seen this a lot on the channel here in recent weeks. They're doing a traveling roadshow version of Francis Ford Coppola's classic film. It brought in $5,414 in just 1 theater. Looking at the top films in limited release, at number 1, we have Sayara, which played in 295 theaters and brought in $664,000 in those theaters. Sayara is a Hindi language love film about a poet and a musician from India. Then we have Sarbala G in an unknown number of theaters, which brought in $557,000. Sarbala G is a Punjabi language Indian film about a groom and his cousin, whose job it is to take care of him, leading up to and on his wedding day. In 3rd place, we have Sorry Baby. A24 is rolling this movie out glacially slow. It's now in 80 theaters and made $246,000. Then we have Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight. In weekend 2, it's already in over 300 theaters. It brought in $186,000. And then another movie that's just been kind of traveling around, very slow rollout, Bad Shabbos. Technically in week 34 of its release, but it's in 41 theaters and brought in just over $57,000. This is what the summer box office looks like so far. Lilo and Stitch is still number one. Jurassic World Rebirth moves up to number two for the summer at $276.4 million. That bumps How to Train Your Dragon down to number three, but Superman will soon take that number three spot and very possibly the number two spot by next week. It's up 4 places since last week. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning moves down 1 spot to number 5. Thunderbolts moves down to number 6. F1 the movie remains at number 7 for the summer. Final Destination: Bloodlines moves down 2 spots to number 8. Elio keeps having this magical ability to just barely pass the grosses of other summer films in order to stay on the top 10, because it is now past the gross of 28 Years Later. Elio is at number 9. 28 Years Later is going to get bumped off the list by the Fantastic Four: First Steps this upcoming weekend. That's going to put Elio probably at number 10. But that's where its luck is going to run out. Elio will eventually drop off of this list. It will not be a top 10 summer grosser this year unless everything in August really underperforms. But I am also almost into August with all of my top 10 picks intact thus far. These are my box office predictions for the summer versus the actual summer box office so far. My number one pick, Lilo and Stitch, is still number one at the actual summer box office. I picked How to Train Your Dragon second. It is now down to number 3. It's soon to be down to number 4. I picked Superman as the third highest grossing film of the summer. It's moving in that direction, and we'll see just how high it gets. The Fantastic Four was my pick for the number 4 movie of the summer. Of course, we don't know how that movie's going to do yet. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning I picked as the 5th highest grosser of the summer. It is currently at the number 5 position. Jurassic World Rebirth I underestimated by a pretty significant margin. I picked it to be number 6 for the summer. It's right now at number 2. F1 the movie was my pick for number 7. It's currently in number 7. I picked Thunderbolts in 8th place. It's currently in 6th place. Elio is my pick at number 9. It is currently at number 9, but that number is going to turn red in just a matter of weeks. And then The Bad Guys 2, which opens the first weekend in August, was my pick for the 10th highest grossing film of the summer. It's going to have to do pretty well because it has to clear Final Destination: Bloodlines and maybe one other. This is what the domestic box office looks like overall for 2025. A Minecraft movie is at number 1 at $423.9 million, but Lilo and Stitch is coming for it. It's only about $5 million behind it, and if it overtakes a Minecraft movie, it will become the highest grossing film of the year domestically. Sinners is right now at number 3, but Jurassic World Rebirth is right behind at $276.4 million. It's up 1 spot from last week. How to Train Your Dragon is down 1 spot to number 5. Superman hits the list at number 6. Captain America: Brave New World, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, and Thunderbolts are all down 1 spot to number 9. F1 the movie remains in the number 10 spot, and Final Destination: Bloodlines drops off the overall box office for 2025 domestically. This is what the worldwide box office looks like so far this year. Superman is now a top 10 movie at just over $408 million. That drops Thunderbolts off of the top 10. And Superman is very quickly going to leap over Captain America: Brave New World, Detective Chinatown 1900, and F1 the movie. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is down a couple spots from last week. It's now the 6th highest grossing movie of the year globally. How to Train Your Dragon is at number 5. Jurassic World Rebirth jumps up 2 spots to number 4 at just under $650 million. A Minecraft movie is in 3rd place, and Lilo and Stitch is now officially the 2nd movie this year to make over $1 billion and the first Hollywood film to make over $1 billion. Nudja 2 is, of course, the number 1 movie of the year at $2.2 billion. And it's crazy to think about the fact that if Disney had stuck to their original plan and released Moana 2 and Lilo and Stitch on Disney Plus, they would have lost out basically on $2 billion plus grossers. That is just mind-boggling. So that's everything going on at the box office. Let's take a look now at the world of streaming, including some changes in how I'm reporting a lot of my streaming numbers. Let's jump in first to the latest at the world of Netflix. These are the latest numbers. There are new ones that will come out today for the week of July 7th through the 13th. And this is really fun to see. K-pop Demon Hunters, and I think it's 3rd or 4th week of release, has jumped to the number 1 spot overall on Netflix with 24.24 million views. This has been a slow burn. The music is doing well on the music charts, and K-pop Demon Hunters has really found its audience. It was a negligible drop-off really from last week. It's just great to see viewers find movies on their own time and not necessarily just the ones that Netflix tells you should be excited about or kind of pushes on you a little more aggressively. Medea's Destination Wedding Opens in second place on the Netflix charts with 19.1 million views. Not as successful as Straw, the other recent Tyler Perry film, but good enough for number 2. In third place, we have Brick with 18.18 million views. Now, this is not the early Rian Johnson movie starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt. This is a German film about a couple who finds themselves mysteriously walled into their apartment. The Old Guard 2 falls down to number 4 at 15.98 million views. Right behind is Squid Game Season 3 with an additional 15.88 million views. In sixth place, we have Almost Cops, which is a comedy from the Netherlands. It's a buddy cop comedy from the Netherlands. Then we have 1923 Season 1, which is one of the Yellowstone spinoffs. It's in Netflix in many territories, and it brought in 9.7 million total views for the season as a whole. In eighth place, we have Siam, which is a Thai zombie action movie. Then the latest Trainwreck documentary, Trainwreck Project X, about the actual house party that got out of control and was later adapted into a film. It brought in 7.38 million views. And in 10th place, we have the limited series Angela, which is not actually a Netflix original limited series. It's from Spain about a woman's suspicions about her husband. So based on Netflix's reported rating numbers, this is what I have as the 10 most watched Netflix movies of the year so far. Back in Action, still number 1 at 149.84 million views, followed by Straw, Exterritorial, The Life List, and K-Pop Demon Hunters, based on viewership numbers now at number 5 for the year. Havoc, Counterattack, Ad Vitam, and The Electric State all move down one spot. And The Old Guard 2 enters the top 10 at 53.45 million views. But Netflix also released one of their 2 annual reports this past week called the What We Watched Report, where they essentially list all of the ratings data for the first 6 months of the year. Not just the movies that made the top 10 or the shows that made the top 10, but everything. So there are often movies or shows that fall off the top 10 that continue to rack up viewership that you don't see. And a lot of times that can really fill out the picture as far as what people are actually watching. So these are the 10 most watched movies on Netflix so far this year, according to their own What We Watched report. Now, it only runs through June, so there's some that are going to be lower than what we just saw because there are July numbers that are folded into my numbers. But through June, these were the top 10 most watched movies on Netflix. We have Back in Action with 164.7 million views. Straw is at 102.9. There's some July views that haven't been folded in there yet. Then we have The Life List, Exterritorial, and Havoc. But then at number 6, we have The Secret Life of Pets 2, which is not often on the top 10 chart for Netflix, but obviously is getting a lot of viewership. It's the 6th most watched movie on the platform at 74.5 million views. The Electric State also racking up some more views than the ratings might indicate at number 7 at 74.2 million views. Counterattack and Ad Vitam are at numbers 8 and 9. And Despicable Me 4 rounds out the top 10 at 69.8 million views, tied with Ad Vitam. Again, another movie that is on and off the top 10, but obviously racking up a lot of viewership just outside of the top 10. These are the most watched Netflix shows of the year, again, according to the ratings reports that I have access to. At number 1 is Adolescence at 142.58 million views, followed by Squid Game Season 2 and Squid Game Season 3. Sirens moves up to number 4, with Zero Day moving down to number 5. Then we have Ginny and Georgia Season 3 moving up to number 6. American Murder, Gabby Petito moving down to number 7. And then the top 10 is rounded out by Missing You, The Night Agent Season 2, and the kids show Ms. Rachel Season 1. But let's see what the most watched shows of the year on Netflix are according to their own complete ratings data. And again, this just runs through June, which affects Squid Game 3 most of all. There's a lot of viewership in Squid Game 3 that happened in July. Adolescence is still number 1 at 144.8 million total views. Squid Game Season 2 is in second place at 117.3 million views. Then we have Squid Game Season 3 at 71.5 million views through June, followed by Zero Day and Missing You. American Murder, Gabby Petito is at number 6. Miss Rachel is up to number 7 when you take all viewership into account at 53.4 million total views for the first season of that show. Sirens is at number 8, followed by The Night Agent Season 2 and Ginny and Georgia Season 3. So what we see with the complete Netflix ratings data is that when you are compiling the data weekly, which I do because that's what I have access to, you get a pretty good picture of what people are watching, but there are going to be one or two things that are bubbling just underneath the surface. However, looking at the data as a whole, I still feel comfortable reporting that data week to week. And then when we get the full drop of data every 6 months, I will go back and revise and update that. But that is not the case with the numbers that we get from Nielsen, and I'll explain why in just a couple minutes. But first, let's look at the latest weekly numbers from Nielsen. Now, these are domestic only, not global, and they're delayed by about a month. These are the most watched streaming movies for the week of June 16th through the 22nd. At number 1 was Plane with 8.9 million hours watched, followed by The Accountant 2. A Minecraft movie comes in third place with its debut week on Amazon at 7.8 million hours watched, followed by Straw and The Last Witch Hunter on Netflix, one of those movies that gets added usually mid-month. 5.2 million hours watched for that one. Snow White on Disney Plus continuing to have pretty unimpressive views on streaming as it had in theaters. Titan, the Ocean Gate Disaster on Netflix comes in 7th place. Then we have the debut week of K-pop Demon Hunters at 4.1 million hours watched. If the overall Netflix trend holds, then we should see those numbers go up on the Nielsen charts in the next few weeks. Trainwreck, the Astroworld Tragedies at number 9, and then the 90s thriller Copycat rounds out the top 10. Looking at the most watched streaming shows for June 16th through the 22nd, at number 1 was Blind Spot, the NBC show that went off the air a few years ago, followed by Ginny in Georgia and Love Island USA as it was getting closer to its season finale. Animal Kingdom is in 4th place, followed by the debut of The Waterfront in 5th place at 18.4 million hours watched total. Then we have basically the usual suspects: Grey's Anatomy, Bluey, NCIS, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Family Guy. And for the week of June 16th through the 22nd, if you look at the top shows by watch time per available episode, The Waterfront comes in at number 1 with 2.3 million hours watched per episode, followed by Ginny in Georgia at 930,000. The Better Sisters in 3rd at over 900,000. Then we have Department Q continuing to bring in very strong viewership per episode. We Were Liars rounds out the top 5, followed by America's Sweethearts, which is the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders reality show at 726,000 hours per episode. Fubar is at number 7, followed by Animal Kingdom, Blind Spot, and Tires, which is pulling in respectable numbers. I believe that show has been renewed for another season. So as I do with the Netflix numbers, I also track and report the Nielsen numbers as far as the most watched movies and series of the year, week to week. But one of the great things about streaming and the fact that it is an everyday thing of life now is that Nielsen is also being more transparent about their numbers, and they dropped a 6-month summary of what has been streamed so far in the US last week. However, those numbers were significantly different from what I've been reporting because Nielsen reports fewer shows and fewer movies each week. And while the charts that I've been showing you as far as the most watched movies and series of 2025 have been largely accurate, there have also been some pretty big omissions because obviously there are movies that are just outside the top 10 week to week, but are among the most watched movies and shows of the year. First of all, these are the most watched streaming movies in the US through the end of June. At number 1 is Moana 2, which matches what I've been reporting, followed by Despicable Me 4 and Back in Action. But the original Moana is much higher up than I have had it based on reported numbers. It's the 4th most watched movie in the US so far this year, followed by The Wild Robot at number 5, which was a lot higher. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was not on my top 10 as far as the most watched movies of the year, but it is, according to Nielsen, the 6th most watched movie on streaming at 62.2 million hours watched. Then we have The Electric State, again, more hours than you would have expected from what we saw on the ratings at 54.2 million. Wicked is in 8th place. Frozen wasn't anywhere near my top 10 on Disney Plus. That is a perpetual favorite that is nonetheless often not on the top 10, but it is one of the most watched movies on streaming at 50.9 million hours watched. And then we have The Accountant 2 on Amazon. When we go over to streaming series, again, this is through June 28th, so I had even a little bit of the numbers we've been talking about on the show. Bluey is still the overall most watched show at 417.65 million hours watched, followed by Grey's Anatomy, NCIS, Family Guy, and Bob's Burgers. SpongeBob SquarePants is a little higher when you look at all ratings data at number 6, followed by The Big Bang Theory, The Rookie, Law & Order SVU, and this one really surprised me, American Dad at number 10 on Hulu Hulu at $216.2 million. That show almost never shows up on the Nielsen top 10 streaming shows. And yet, according to their overall viewing data, it is one of the most popular shows on streaming. So Seth MacFarlane is a big asset to Hulu and to streaming in general because he's got American Dad and Family Guy both in the top 10. And when we look at the most watched original streaming series, Squid Game is at number 1, followed by Reacher, The Night Agent, Ginny and Georgia, Severance, 1923. But then we have The Pitt at number 7. The Pitt only popped up on the top 10 a couple of times while it was streaming on Max, producing new episodes. But it is the 7th most watched original streaming series of the year, according to Nielsen data. The Handmaid's Tale is at number 8, You is at number 9, and Landman is at number 10. And because so much of the Nielsen data is so divergent from what is actually being shown, what I'm going to do here on the show is to continue to report the most watched streaming movies and streaming shows every single week, and which movies and shows had the best debuts of the year, what people are watching right now, or at least currently as to when Nielsen's reporting the data. But as far as the most watched shows and movies of the year, I'm just going to do that in a couple batches at the end of the year because I want my numbers to be as accurate as possible. I think I can still achieve that with the ratings data that I get from Netflix, but I don't think that I can do that with the data that I get from Nielsen. But that just means that the streaming section will be a little bit shorter. And according to some of the feedback that I've gotten, there's some of you that are probably okay with that. And that's everything I've got for you this week. Before I go, though, I just wanted to draw your attention to some things you might be interested in watching at home and in theaters this upcoming week. First of all, my Jaws fandom requires me to inform you that we are currently in the middle of Shark Week on Discovery, so if you want great shark programming, or at least a bunch of shark programming, then you can check out Discovery this week for new stuff every single night during prime time. Then we have today, on Tuesday, a couple of movies that are available for purchase and also premium video on demand. Those are those higher priced rentals that last for about 48 hours. You can watch Lilo and Stitch at home, and you can also watch The Materialists at home if you missed them in theaters. On Wednesday, unless something really goes wrong, the season 27 premiere of South Park is scheduled to air on Comedy Central. I did a whole story about South Park and their contract negotiations on the channel on Sunday. News broke late last night that Trey Parker and Matt Stone have apparently reached a deal for the streaming rights to South Park, which means it is likely that the season premiere is going to happen as scheduled unless there's a delay between the time I recorded this and the time you're watching it. So if you've been looking for new South Park, you can at least watch it on Comedy Central and perhaps also on Paramount Plus and or HBO Max, depending on where it actually lands. On Thursday, the second volume of The Sandman Season 2 will debut on Netflix, and also debuting on Netflix Thursday is the theatrical feature Until Dawn, which hit theaters earlier this year. Then on Friday, we have the big movie release of the week, The Fantastic Four: First Steps, which will be hitting theaters everywhere. Unfortunately, I will not have a review for you of The Fantastic Four: First Steps at the embargo time, which I don't like because I want to give you my thoughts as soon as possible. And it's also not great for the channel because I'm behind everybody else that got to see it earlier and gets their reviews out right away. But they're not holding regional screenings for that movie, at least not in my region, until Wednesday. So I'll have my review for Fantastic Four out to you on Thursday morning. I wish I could get out to you sooner, but I am at the mercy of when the studios decide to screen the films. In limited release is one of my favorite movies of the year. It was a documentary that played at Sundance, 2,000 Meters to Andriivka, which is a very powerful, embedded wartime documentary in Ukraine. Just a powerful, horrifying movie, but also, I think, an important movie. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Bambi: The Reckoning, which is hitting some theaters this weekend. It is the latest film from the, let's say, creative team that brought you the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey franchise. Also hitting limited release this weekend is a movie called Oh Hi, which is from writer-director Sophie Brooks. It stars Molly Gordon as a woman on her first getaway with her new boyfriend, who's played by Logan Lerman, when things take a turn. In limited release as well is the horror film The Home, which I think was the mystery movie at a lot of chains last night. It's from the creator and writer-director of The Purge, James DeMonico, and stars Pete Davidson as a guy sentenced to community service who finds
finds his volunteer hours in a nursing home more horrifying than he could ever imagine. There's a big streaming movie hitting Netflix this weekend. Happy Gilmore 2 debuts on Friday. Happy Gilmore has long been my favorite Adam Sandler movie, and I will have a review of that movie to you probably on Friday because I can't wait to see the movie. And then there are a couple of theatrical releases this year that you can catch on streaming this weekend. The Phoenician Scheme will make its debut on Peacock, and Death of a Unicorn will make its debut on Max. And that's everything I've got for you this week. Be sure to stay tuned right here to the channel, as I mentioned, for my review of the Fantastic Four First Steps, probably a spoiler review later that weekend, as well as my review of Happy Gilmore 2, plus any news that might pop up. I always like to cover it on the channel if I think it's interesting and I can add something to it. But most of all, as always, thank you for watching this video. If you like what you see and you're not subscribed yet, please be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell so that you're notified. And until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.